So silence gives consent. And today what I'm hoping is we can break some silence, even when it's uncomfortable, because I think we want to do important things. What I want you to reflect on is if you or someone you know has experienced one of the following 10 events prior to the age of being 18: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, feeling unloved or unwanted by your family, being afraid your basic needs might not get met, a divorce or separation of your caregivers, witnessing domestic violence in your home, someone with a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue in your home, someone in your home incarcerated, all prior to the age of 18. I've just defined adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, otherwise known as childhood emotional trauma. And it's a health risk that increases social problems in our community, raises our risk for disease, and can even shorten our lifespan. The Center of Disease Control names it as the prime determinant of health. And yet, unlike texting while driving or...
One second, everybody. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Can y'all see the video screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start it over so everybody can see.
So silence is consent. And today what I'm hoping is we can break some silence, even when it's uncomfortable, because I think we want to do important things. What I want you to reflect on is if you or someone you know has experienced one of the following 10 events prior to the age of being 18: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, feeling unloved or unwanted by your family, being afraid your basic needs might not get met, a divorce or separation of your caregivers, witnessing domestic violence in your home, someone with a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue in your home, someone in your home incarcerated, all prior to the age of 18. I've just defined adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, otherwise known as childhood emotional trauma. And it's a health risk that increases social problems in our community, raises our risk for disease, and can even shorten our lifespan. The Center of Disease Control names it as the prime determinant of health. And yet, unlike texting while driving or smoking cigarettes when we're young, for most of us, it's still an unknown epidemic. And yet 70% of the general population has had at least one of those events happen. That's 1,050 people in this room and about 7 people in your row. 1 out of 6 of us has had 4 or more of those events happen. And that's 240 people in this room and probably 1 or 2 people in your row. And yet we're not talking about it. Even though when it goes above a 4, some pretty hard statistics come about. At a 4, we're over 1,500% more likely to attempt suicide, over 550% more likely to become an alcoholic, COPD, liver disease, asthma. At a 6, we're more likely to die 20 years younger than our counterpart, at age 60 instead of age 80. And so we need to embrace what this silence costs us. I want to introduce you to Henry. At 18 months old, Henry moves into your community, and neighbors go to knock on his door, but they hear loud screaming and noise inside, and they look at each other and say, you know, we do Crime Head Watch and checking building maintenance, but I don't know if we're in for this. And so they walk away. At 2.5 years old, he goes to daycare, and they notice mom has a bruise on her eye, and Henry's kind of aggressive in class. And they go, director, should we do something about this? No, she says, we're in charge of good quality childcare, not this. And so things go on. At 5 years old, he's put upstairs in his room and he hears a loud crash downstairs, and he comes downstairs and mommy's bleeding on the kitchen floor and dad's standing above her. 4 big police officers burst down the door. They grab dad and put him in the police car, grab mom, put her in the ambulance, grab Henry and lock him in the car. A woman comes and taps on his window. She has his things in a garbage bag and says, come on, let's go. He drives to a new neighborhood where he knows no one. Falls asleep in a bed, not in his pajamas, crying himself to sleep. He wakes up in the morning going to a new school that he doesn't know, and the teacher yells at him because he has a hard time following the rules, And he says, wow, that sounds like Dad, and I don't even know where Dad is. And next, he moves from school to school, and his foster care parents get angry at him, and they start yelling at him, and begins wetting his bed at night until a new social worker comes and says, come on, put your things back in the garbage bag. We got to move again. And he wonders how many places he's going to have to live, where his parents are, and if he'll see them again. His behavioral health file gets this thick, and so does his school file, until one day they tell him his parents aren't his parents anymore, termination of parental rights. And so now he's up for adoption, but nobody really wants him. And so he's in his 10th foster care placement at 11 years old, and foster dad and foster mom are fighting, and he thinks, I'm never gonna watch someone put their hands on someone else again. And he steps in and he takes a swing, and the next thing he knows, he's in handcuffs in juvenile detention. Now that's a tough story to hear. And what I want you to think about is 12 systems and 50 plus people crossed Henry and his family's life, and yet no one thought it was their job to connect with them about that hard story. And that doesn't make sense to me because, right, we're caring people. All of us are. And so I wonder, maybe it's because we were taught it's not our role, it's not our place. Or maybe from a more hidden part of ourselves, we think that's Henry, that's his family. We can't change stuff like that. That's them and this is us. What I want you to hear today is this is not an us-them conversation. This is an all of us conversation. And if we choose to keep our story of silence, this epidemic's gonna grow. And that feels uncomfortable, right? And if I'm doing this right, you feel uncomfortable because when we get uncomfortable, we grow, and that's a good thing. And you might be saying, Allison, what do you want me to do about this? I mean, I don't know how to break this silence. I might not have the right letters behind my name. I might not have any letters behind my name. I mean, violence and abuse, that seems like pretty big stuff. And what I would say to you is this: 70% of why anyone changes a negative health behavior is because of the person who connects with them and inspires them to change that. Relationship is the evidence-based practice, connection, and you don't need the right letters or any letters to do that. So I want to tell you about Kat. Kat had 8 of those 10 things happen before she was 19 years old. She went from residential placement about between the ages of 13 and 19, about 8 to 10. And she was the kid that broke windows and tore down doors. Sometimes she was held down in restraints and injected with Thorazine. She tells the story of a nurse who one time said, you know what, Kat, act your age, not your shoe size. I own this place. You got to come through me to get out of here. And that's who Kat would have thought she was until she met Howard, a mental health tech who had no letters behind his name, but he understood connection and he was willing to go past his role. And he said, you know what, Kat, I get we need to connect. And he had to find her motivation. So he took her to the gym and said, you know what, I want you to exercise. And if you give me 1 solid hour of really good exercise, I'll let you go back to the unit and tear everything up. And she said, hell yeah, right? The joke was, though, that when she walked out of that gym, she was crawling and she couldn't lift a chair to throw, okay? And that was Howard's plan, although she didn't know that. And so Howard looked at her and he said, she began telling these chapters of her story. And he said, you know what, Kat, I see something in you. You're gonna do something important in your life. Well, Kat had never heard that before. And so she liked that. So she did what Howard didn't plan and got locked up a lot to see him. That wasn't the intention. And so she came there one day and he said, Kat, you coming here to see me? And she said, yeah. And he said, here's my schedule, meet me in the lobby, right? We don't need to do that. So she did. That's how she got through high school. The thing is that hard stuff doesn't stop happening at 18. Kat went away to college. She was raped. She went through a serious suicide attempt, and she came back to the adult psychiatric institution, the same place where she was as a kid. Howard found out she was being admitted, and at 2 in the morning, he came to her admission and said, Kat, please don't give up before you know what you can become. I'm gonna hold hope right here till you're strong enough to grab it. Right here. That was the last time Kat attempted suicide, the last time she was locked in a residential placement, and the first job she ever had was a psych tech on a unit like Howard's because she promised to pay that connection forward. Now, we're sitting here with 2 stories, and that's the intention. For centuries, stories have taught us how to make meaning. Dr. Brené Brown teaches us that we are hardwired for connection, and that one of our deepest fears is disconnection, that fear of not belonging. And so we're sitting with a story of disconnection and connection, and that gives us a choice. We can think about Henry before he threw that punch, the 12 systems that crossed his path, the 50+ people that chose not to connect. And we can think maybe if somebody had connected earlier, that story could have been different. And we can think about Kat, because Kat might not be who you think, because Kat's story is my story. My nickname throughout school was Alley Cat. And if Howard had not made a decision to connect with a kid like me, I truly believe I would have been in an institution, dead, or probably in jail. And so we're not powerful enough to know who's had trauma and who hasn't. We're not powerful enough to know who makes it and who doesn't. But we're powerful enough to do two things. One, teach someone else about childhood trauma as a health issue. And two, make that risk of connection. I think about if somebody came up to me and said, you know, Allison, I saw this awesome doctor on Friday talk about childhood trauma, and they told me that I should tell someone about it. And I'm wondering if you would listen. I think I would have listened, and I think it would have made a difference. Mavis Lino once said, if you want to make a difference in the world, the next time you see someone being cruel to another human being, take it personal, because it is. And what I would add to that powerful statement is the next time someone gives you the honor of walking their trauma, their pain story in front of you, answer that call with connection. Because you see, ordinary acts of courage can change this. It's not going to be the monumental events. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
So letters behind your name and a license aren't required to show empathy or connectedness. We see that in these two stories that she just shared in this video, that there's a significant difference in outcome of the two stories. There's one story where nobody bothered to connect with the child, and then there's one story where just one person connected with the child. Trauma is difficult at any age, even in adulthood, but it's even more difficult as a child because as children, we don't know how to process that trauma. So, you know, still to this day, people sit there and they see troubled children with emotional problems and behavioral problems, and they sit there, like she said, and say, that's not my job to take care of that. Well, like she said, you should take it personal, and yes, it is. It is all of our jobs to just connect with them and show them that we care. You know, that can be the difference one day between a child ending up in jail or becoming a doctor like the person that we just saw in this video. I want to thank everybody for joining this evening. Welcome to our presentation, The Hidden Impact of Child Abuse. I just want to go over a few things real quick. I'm just going to ask that everybody stay muted throughout the presentation. We're going to do a Q&A at the very end. And let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to introduce ourselves and get going. So we are Bay Area Turning Point. For those of you that don't know, we are a nonprofit agency that provides services to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, those who have been impacted directly or indirectly. My name is Melissa Prentice. I'm the Outreach, Education, and Prevention Coordinator. I've been with Bay Area Turning Point for 10.5 years now. I provide prevention education to staff, children, and other outreach services. I educate on healthy relationships to create positive changes in our community.
Hi everyone, my name is Alejandra LaRock. I'm the Manager of Advocacy and Counseling Services with Bay Area Turning Point, and I'm super excited to be here with y'all today. So out in Chambers County, what we typically do out there is similar to what we do at our Webster location, counseling services for children, both in schools or at the office, as well as adults. And we also help with protective orders, getting clients connected with assistance and court accompaniments and accompaniments to things like SANE exams, and really just any type of legal and resource connection we can get them in touch with. So yeah, that's what we do.
Hello everyone, my name is Naila Harrison and I am the child counselor at Bay Area Turning Point. I have been with the company for 1 year next week, and I interned with the organization for 2 years prior, which really gave me some insight into the organization and really made me want to be a part of the big picture. I advocate for children by providing play therapy, crisis intervention, art therapy, support groups, and several other services. I I educate the children and their parents on effective coping skills to help improve the quality of life. And I teach families how to communicate their feelings in a productive way. One of my passions is helping bridge the gap in communication between teens and their parents, because a lot of times teens don't know how to communicate what they feel, so they don't feel heard. So I try to bridge that gap.
Okay, so here are some of the objectives that we're going to be covering this evening. So we're going to define what child abuse and neglect is. We're going to identify signs of child abuse, including those from a distance, considering we are in a pandemic right now. We're going to learn the protocol for reporting. We're going to talk about strategies for families to cope with stress, some parenting tips, learn how to identify and create a support system. We're going to go over some strategies for safety and prevention. And we're going to learn how the community can provide support. So to jump right in, we're going to first define what child abuse and neglect is. Child abuse and neglect is any act or series of acts of commission or omission by a parent, caregiver, or other person in a custodial role that results in harm, potential harm, or threat of harm to a child. So let's break that definition down a little bit. So commission, words or overt actions that cause harm, potential harm, or threat of harm. This is an example would be actual physical abuse, sexual abuse, or psychological abuse. Omission would be failure to provide basic needs or to protect from harm or potential harm. So for example, you have neglect. You have physical neglect, emotional neglect, medical or dental, educational, inadequate supervision, exposure to violent environments. And Allie's going to talk to us about how to identify some signs of neglect.
So neglect when it comes to children can be seen in many different forms, right? A lot of times people imagine, worst case scenario that we see in like movies or on social media, being presented. But neglect can look like even as simple as, not sending your child to school with proper meals, right? It can look like self-harm attempts or threats of suicide, which is one of the things that is probably the biggest sign. And there's a little asterisk next to that one too, because with children especially, when there's things going on at home and they feel like they have no control over that environment piece, typically they look for a way to help fix it. And when they start feeling like there's nothing they can do on their end to help fix and repair their environment, they start to turn it inward to things like self-harm or threats of suicide, because they feel like that's the only thing they can control most of the time, is what they do to themselves. The other thing can be sudden changes in a child's behavior, such as withdrawal from friends or usual activities, right? A lot of times we think of the neglected child as the child that kind of isolates themselves, maybe the loner type of child in teenagers. On the other end too, neglect can look like the opposite, right? So if you notice maybe a child is overly involved in school, very hyper attentive, always aiming to have perfect scores and, has anxiety around that piece, it can come across on that too. So usually it's extreme ends, not so much in the middle. Children also don't receive help for medical needs, right? So if they have, a cut or something or significant bruising and they're not receiving proper medical treatment, that can also be another sign. Anxiety that something bad will happen, or anxiety around changes with school, especially, right? A lot of times things in school will change, last minute, maybe plans at a field trip, or the teacher decides to cover a different topic and the child's not prepared. Sometimes that can also be a sign of neglect. Lack of adult supervision, especially now with remote work, right? A lot of times it's really hard for parents to be involved. So that can be a tricky area, right? So you really want to navigate, and if you suspect that there is a lack of supervision because you see a child's grades are slipping, make sure that you have that contact with the parent and discuss that further. And lack of personal hygiene as well. A lot of times that can be a huge sign. Not brushing the hair, maybe worn or tattered clothes, things like that are things to keep an eye out for.
Okay, so you know what? Sorry, skipped one.
I was gonna say, I think there was another one. So some other signs of neglect can be parent caretaker denies existence of the child's problems, right? So maybe they'll minimize what the child is fearful of or has anxiety over. They just kind of like, oh, tough it up, get over it, be a man about it, right? That's a common one that we hear, especially for boys and teenagers. Parent or caregiver asks the teacher, or you notice that the parent's harsh with discipline, right? Especially over remote learning, you might hear a parent yelling around in the background, threatening to maybe whip their child or something like that, things to keep an eye out for. Now, granted, like I said, have that conversation with the parent too, figure out what's going on in the household, what's going on in the parent's life, because with COVID, again, right, remote learning is stressful on parents, right? We're learning to balance our own work on top of helping our kids really get through school. So, be aware, kind of dig into it, search a little more, try to understand what's going on. If a child feels like they're a burden or an inconvenience to their parent, right? Sometimes kids might approach their teachers and say things like, well, my mom's really always busy at work and, she doesn't really have time for that, right? That can be a huge sign of neglect, right? Or a child taking on parental roles even, where they're taking care of their younger siblings. That's a big sign as well. I know sometimes it's needed in families, but there's a fine line between helping a parent take care of younger siblings versus taking care and being that parent role, right? Being overly active, focusing on their siblings more than focusing on being a child like they probably should.
And just kind of going back to parent or caregiver seeing the child as a burden or inconvenience, this is them acting like it's the child's fault that they're alive, basically. It's like, I don't even know why you're here. You're nothing but a pain to me. So that kind of behavior. Okay, so physical abuse. We have some unexplained injuries, inconsistent explanation of how they obtain the injury. So for example, one day the kid comes to school and says, with a broken arm, and they say, well, how'd you do that? Oh, I fell off my bike and broke my arm. And then about a week later, the child's sitting there saying, and it's like, oh, well, I broke my arm falling down the stairs. So it's inconsistent explanation. Same thing if the parent's explanation is inconsistent. Fading marks after absence from school. So if the child is absent from school for a couple of days and then they show up and you see some fading bruises. They seem frightened of their parent or caregiver. Bedwetting or nightmares. They cower at the approach of adults. They, like we said, conflicting stories from parents. One parent saying one thing, the other parent saying something else. Like we said with the neglect, the parent or caregiver uses harsh discipline or encourages harsh discipline from a teacher or a child care provider. And if there's a history of abuse in the home. So sexual abuse can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to determine just because some of these things can actually be other stuff. So it would kind of be a judgment call. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. It's like if they have blood in their underwear, that might be or an STI or pregnancy, that's probably going to be along the lines of sexual abuse, especially if it's a young child. But some things can be a medical issue or another health issue. So that's where you want to kind of pair it with the behavior or other signs. So child has difficulty walking or sitting. They refuse to change for physical activities such as gym or sports. Some kids are just embarrassed to do that. So that alone may not be a sign of sexual abuse, but it could be. So that's something where you would want to keep it on your radar. They demonstrate bizarre, unusual sexual knowledge or behavior for their age. They have complaints or passive remarks about rashes or itches around the genitals. They have blood in their underwear, STIs or pregnancy, reports of sexual abuse. The parent or caregiver is secretive and isolated, and the parent or caregiver is overly protective or severely limits the child contact with others. And that is also a sign of trafficking. So whenever children are being trafficked, a lot of times the parent won't let them talk. They're very protective over them. They won't let their child contact others. Again, that is something to keep on your radar, but that alone is not necessarily going to indicate trafficking or sexual abuse.
And I do want to add too, really quick on the sexual abuse slide. So the bedwetting can also be a part of that as well. Bedwetting, it can be a sign of that sexual abuse as well as that physical abuse. Okay, and we're looking not just bedwetting, it can happen obviously in younger kids, but especially more for kids who have already gone and moved on to that phase of using the toilet on their own. They've reverted back to bedwetting. That's what you're really looking for to see when it comes to that sexual physical abuse piece with the bedwetting specifically too.
And on the other slide that Allie had, it said something about hygiene. In some instances with sexual abuse, children who've been sexually abused will not want to take a bath in hopes that since they're not clean, their abuser won't want to do anything to them. So that's another thing to pay attention to.
Okay, and I'm going to have Allie talk about emotional abuse.
So emotional abuse is really, really impactful on children. Okay, this is where you start to see children's self-esteem getting hit the most and the hardest, and where a lot of it, can transform into depression or anxiety. So you're looking for things like a delayed emotional development, right? And that can look very different. I've seen it a lot of times with kids who just avoid talking in general, but specifically avoid talking about, not necessarily just how they feel, but about any type of enjoyment in their life or anything like that, right? They don't get excited about like going to the park, like, yeah, I went to the park, right? They don't get excited about things we typically would see kids get excited about. They try to minimize it on their own and hide that piece. Loss of that self-confidence, self-esteem, socially withdrawn or avoidant as well. Sometimes they can be desperate for attention, right? So this might be the child that is acting up in class, right? Trying to, get some attention, right? Because for a child, their mental state is, any type of attention is better than no attention. Okay, so sometimes that can feed into the neglect piece as well. So if a child is being neglected, they might be hearing harsh words, oh, you're stupid. Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? Right? They'll mimic some of those pieces, sometimes in school, sometimes in other social situations. But what you're looking for is, are they seeking that attention, right? What is that about? And that's why the beginning video that we showed about connection piece is so vital and important, because that attention, right? You want to make sure that it's not that type of attention where they're being destructive or hurting themselves or harming others around them, right? So you might see a little bit of bullying. Other things you can see, or the parent or caregiver blames or belittles the child, right? So, especially if you're a teacher or if you're a family member or a friend and you're around the family, right? Listen to the words that the parent is choosing or that the caregiver is choosing, when they're trying to discipline their child. Are they using words like, hey, let's go to your room and we'll talk about this, hey, that's not right, and explaining to the child? Or are they just yelling and screaming at the child and, cussing around them and calling them worthless, things like that? Or sometimes the parent or caregiver just automatically rejects the child, right? Like, I don't want to see your face in here, get out, right? So things like that are big signs of emotional abuse.
Okay, so considering we are in a pandemic right now, we came up with some ways to identify abuse from a distance. So I know a lot of students have gone back to school, but they were out of school for a while, and some still are. So here are some ways that you can possibly identify that there might be abuse going on in the home virtually. So if the family has internet capabilities, but the child hasn't been participating in the online courses, there's no contact with families after several attempts, the child has communicated that they feel unsafe. You've noticed a change in the child's mood or behavior. You've seen the child in a dangerous situation before. The family has a history of unhealthy behavior. So some of this goes back to past stuff, prior domestic violence, sexual assault, criminal record, substance abuse. The child has a history of poor boundaries. So these can be physical, emotional, or verbal, or sexual too. Going back to what we were talking about under the sexual abuse slide, where they have a knowledge of sexual knowledge that is way inappropriate for their age. If one of the parents has expressed concerns, or both of the parents, it's not always a parent that is abusing a child. So if the parents have expressed concerns, the child is responsible for caring for another child in the home. oftentimes in homes where there is abuse, it's usually the oldest child, but usually one of the children will become responsible for the other children in the home, or the child shows signs of distress during video calls. They're unable to concentrate on tasks, or they're overly focused. Now, this again, this is kind of use at your discretion, try to pair it up with some other tasks, because, I mean, let's face it, we all kind of have trouble focusing online. I mean, you know, me being an adult in my 30s, I have trouble focusing on things going on online. So that kind of needs to be paired with something else, but it is something to keep on the radar. The child runs away. The child appears to be wearing the same clothing. You know, they're not being changed or anything. The environment just appears to be chaotic. So, you know, you see people running around the background. You hear screaming and yelling in the background. You just see chaos. And obviously the child's not going to be able to concentrate on that part. So here are some ways that you'd be able to check in with families and friends. And this is, we actually put this part together more for teachers, but this can be anybody. If you're ever on a Zoom call and you notice something going on, these are some questions that you can check in. Whenever you're on a phone call with parents or children, ask a series of yes or no questions as a safety precaution, such as, are you feeling okay today? Do you feel safe at home? Is there anything at home making you feel uncomfortable? Do you need somebody to talk to you? Do you have somebody to talk to? Have you been feeling stressed? Have you been feeling overwhelmed? And depending on, of course, depending on the age of the child, you know, modify the verbiage. But you know, are things a little difficult for you right now? Are things really hard for you right now? Just asking yes or no questions. And then you can also, and I do this with a lot of my students, you know, we do daily check-ins whenever we start our groups, and I just have them give me one word or give me an emoji to tell me how they're feeling that day. So you can do a one-word check-in so they can describe how they're feeling that day. Or like I said, that you can use an emoji. You know, most of the time, you know, I work with middle school students. So most of the time the emoji is the sleeping one because they're all tired. They want to take a nap in the middle of the day. So, but you know, depending on what they give you, you can kind of determine, all right, well, you're showing me a sad face. Why are you sad today? So if you suspect abuse, we're going to go over Allie's going to go over some things that you can do to help them out.
So, yes. So when you suspect abuse, especially, right, it can be hard to deal with that, right? Or even if a child comes out and discloses the abuse, it can be difficult. And I know for me personally, I struggle with that just because I love kids, right? I love working with children. I want to make sure they're safe, especially if it's someone I know. So what you always want to do is if you suspect abuse, first thing you want to do is make sure you're aware of your personal reactions, verbal and nonverbal. Okay, that's going to be super important. You need to make sure that if you're approaching a child and trying to ask questions, your demeanor is very calm, right? As calm as it can be for all the emotions that you're going to be feeling inside, okay? Some tips that you can do are things like taking a sip of water in between if you need a moment, you know, making sure that you take a look in the mirror even, or say, hey, let me step to the side. I would like to talk to you for a minute, but I'll be right back. I'm going to run to the bathroom. We can talk, okay? Step aside, look at what your face is. If you need to splash some water on your face or something, you might even want to get on the child's level if they're a smaller child too, right? That's been really helpful instead of just kind of having this adult towering over a child. That can be kind of intimidating, especially when it comes to things like sexual abuse, because it can be embarrassing for a child to disclose that information. So we want to make sure that our body language is open and signals to the child, I'm here to listen, I'm not here to judge. Okay, be sure to thank the child for sharing, because that's going to help create a sense of security, right? So if a child is disclosing and giving you the information, you know, make sure that you're listening. You know, ask questions that are open, you know, like, hey, tell me more about that. How did that make you feel, right? Don't come up with things like, well, why did you do that? Or, you know, why did that person do that, right? Because they're going to sense, kids sense when we start to get irritated, when we start to get angry or upset and things like that. So try to remain as open as possible. And you don't need to have this conversation at the speed of light. right? Have that conversation at your own pace, slow it down. It's okay to do that. You want to thank the child, right? Because that's going to help show that, I support this. I'm proud of you for sharing with me. It must have been hard for you to share. Because like Melissa said earlier, sometimes it's not the parent. A lot of times it's someone that the child will actually know, right? I think it's 9 times out of 10 studies have shown that the abuser is someone that the child knows or has a lot of like relation with, maybe like a coach, an uncle, parent, sibling, step sibling, grandparent, things like that. So a lot of times when that abuse is disclosed, it can be shameful and confusing for them. Okay, so avoid asking those questions that might signal blaming or disbelief. Like, are you sure that happened? Are you telling the truth? Right? Because to the child, that's like, what? You don't believe me? Why didn't you say something sooner is a big one, right? A lot of times as parents, we're like, well, we don't mean to come across as blaming, but we can say, well, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because we want them to be there for the child sooner, right? But a lot of times the child can internalize that and take that as, I did something wrong, and they start blaming themselves for not saying something sooner. You want to reassure the child that they did the right thing and that they're not going to get in trouble for sharing, and prepare them and let them know that things might change a little bit, because you want to make sure that they're staying safe. And then going into teaching them about body safety, especially, right? How to say no, especially if they're feeling uncomfortable, right? If they even have the thought of, well, maybe I don't want to play with that person, let them know, hey, that's okay. You can say no if you don't want to go and play with that person. Teach them that their body is their own space, and that if they're not comfortable with even, a family member giving them a hug for whatever reason, teach them different ways to say hi to that family member. Give them a fist bump, a high five, something like that, so that they don't feel like they're pressured or forced, especially if they're feeling that uncomfortable feeling. And make sure that the child can name at least 2 people that they trust to tell if something does happen. Sometimes that trusted adult can be an abuser, right? So we want to make sure we have at least 2 or 3 different people, just that they can go to make sure that they know, hey, I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to get in trouble. This person's going to listen to me. That can make all the difference in the world for a child. Okay, so I encourage you to have that talk with them as well.
Yeah, and whenever you're talking to a child about any kind of abuse, you want to gain their trust because they're already terrified. Like I was saying at the beginning, they don't know how to process what's happened to them. They don't know exactly what's going on, and so they feel like they're going to get in trouble. And so you want to make sure that you're establishing trust with them, and that's why we don't want to ask those blaming questions like, are you telling me the truth? Are you sure? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because while our hearts may be in the right place, what we're telling them is, I don't believe you.
And so a lot of times in schools, staff are encouraged to notify administration. However, it's not always mandatory, right? So especially if this comes up, like if you're in a school setting or even if you're at your own organization too, right? You want to make sure that you're discussing this with professional or upper management if you do have concerns, but you're unsure of what to do with it. Different places have different protocols for when reporting abuse and how to talk to a child about abuse. So making sure that you're following those protocols as clinicians. I know Naila and myself and even Melissa well, first of all, everyone in the state of Texas is a mandated reporter. Okay. So especially when it comes to child abuse, everyone is a mandated reporter. And so we included some information on that piece. Because even if you don't know the child directly, whatever information you can give them, we can put that on record, right? So what you want to pay specific attention to is how urgent is this report, right? Most of the time we want to try to report within 24 to 48 hours. If the child is currently at risk and you know that child is around or has potential exposure to that abuser, you want to make sure that you call in on that hotline number, that 1-800-252-5400, because that's going to send out a CPS worker faster. Okay. If you know that the child has someone safe to be with and they're not having that exposure to their abuser, you can go ahead and make that report online, because sometimes those phones can get backed up and it can be a little bit of time consuming, but it's important to still go ahead and make that report regardless. Okay. So those are two really important things to know. You can call in even if it's not an emergent situation as well. But with any type of emergent situation, you definitely have to call in.
Yeah, and just for clarity, because I know that can be kind of confusing. So where we say in schools, staff is encouraged to notify administration, or in any other place of business, you're encouraged to notify upper management. That is what's optional. Each business has their own protocols. You're expected to follow those protocols. What is not optional is reporting. That is mandatory.
Okay, and then, so multiple victims offer, we have their resources and other family members in the home that may be subjected to the abuse as well, right? So you want to make sure that you can connect them with resources, right? So getting them in touch with domestic violence shelters, or, you know, for child sexual abuse as well, there's places like not just Bay Area Turning Point, but the Children's Assessment Center, you know, Brazoria County Women's Center, things like that, right? There's different organizations that do help along with that. Making sure that they have the national hotline for domestic and sexual violence, right? They can connect you with even further resources. Obviously 911 if it's a dire immediate emergency. And please note that if you do suspect child abuse, you're still, like Melissa was saying, required to contact CPS and make that report. That's the non-negotiable part of that, right? We're all mandated reporters. If you reasonably feel a child is unsafe, report it. Right, the worst that can happen is you pick up that phone, you call, and you let them know, hey, I'm not sure if this is something that I can report. They will walk you through that process and tell you if it is something that is reportable or not, if you're unsure, right? So it's always better safe than sorry.
And if somebody is talking to you and you know you're going to have to make a report, try to gather as much information as you can.
Especially things like the abuser's phone number or child's living address, things like that, child's age or abuser's age or name if you have that information, because they'll probably need all of that stuff to look into it. I know when I've done it, they've required some of those things. And then what type of abuse do you know is going on or suspect is going on? You're good, Mila. Okay. So after a report is made, a lot of things can change for the child, okay? So this is a big piece of recantation. I'm not sure if many of y'all have heard about it or not, but recantation is when the child's story changes, right? So at first they might have disclosed, well, you know, abuse happened, or they were saying, yeah, you know, they made a comment earlier in the week, well, yeah, like so-and-so, you know, punched me or hit me or something. So after a report is made, a lot of times things in the environment will probably change, right? A CPS person will come to interview the child, will touch base with family members and people who are involved or people who are part of the report, right? So the child might even have a new living situation. They might be removed from the home, have to live with a new family member. Just going through the interview process alone can be terrifying for a child, even a teenager, right? They might have to be interviewed by police. They might have to go inside and do a forensic interview where they're recorded, or go in and do a medical exam of some sort, especially if it's sexual abuse involved. And so, you know, they might even be isolated from family members. Family members may not believe them, you know, and it'll cause a shift in their support system. A lot of times that'll happen because the abuser is part of the family in some way, shape, or form, right? Let's say the abuser's an uncle. A lot of times family members will split in two, you know, the uncle would never do that. And the parents are over here like, well, no, my child's saying this is happening, right? And so what will happen is that family will split into two now. And the child no longer gets to see their cousins that they love playing with and hanging around. They no longer get to see their abuser. And sometimes kids want to be able to see their abuser because they have those mixed emotions, right? So because of all of those changes, that can cause that recantation piece, which is on the next slide. So child may change their story or deny the abuse to help them regain that stability and that normalcy back in their life, right? It can, because of that toll that it can take. Children are hyper aware of nonverbals, right? So even if a lot of things don't necessarily change in their environment, they can pick up on the stress of the parents, stress of people around them. And yeah, That's right. So recantation can also happen when a child is abused because CPS was called, right? They don't want to, sometimes they know what CPS is, right? And they're like, no, I don't want CPS to take me away from my family. And so they'll just change their story right off the bat, right? So things like that can often cause that recantation, and children who are abused will internalize and self-blame and like, why did I say anything? I didn't want all of this change to happen. I didn't want so-and-so to get in trouble. Now my mom's stressed, this stuff is going on. People are like stressed out, yelling, arguing. So the child will internalize a lot of that. So just be aware that that's part of the reason why it's really important to have that connection piece and gain their trust when they do disclose, and kind of let them know and kind of prepare for the process to some end. Let them know, like, hey, things are going to change a little bit. Things might look a little bit different, but we're going to be here. We're going to get through this.
All right.
And in some instances, when children have experienced that type of trauma, you never know what's going on in the household when the child is left there, right? So the child could be being sexually abused by the dad, and the child could have told the mom. The mom could have contacted CPS, but the mom could be having second thoughts. You never know, right? So the child is feeling like, okay, so I'm doing something bad because mom's upset with me now. That's, there's just, you never know what's going on in the child's mind or what's going on when they're in that household alone. So trauma changes the way a child sees themselves. It changes the way they see others in the world, and it changes the way they see the world as a whole, right? It changes how they remember and react to situations as well. So that's why in some instances there's recantation. It impacts the central nervous system and the mind. So it changes the way the child thinks. Like their entire world is destroyed because they're children. They're not supposed to be going through these types of things. Abuse and neglect can also result in PTSD. So the child is not only being abused, but they're in some instances neglected as well. So they have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that causes, additional symptoms. The experiences change when a child is not seen and heard. So a child could be in that situation and they could report it and tell someone who they believe they trust, but if they're not seen and given the unconditional positive regard and just being listened to by someone, like she said in the video, all it takes is one person in some instances, just one. So if they're not seen and heard, then they could be like, you know what, well, I wish I wouldn't even said anything. Like me saying something just made everything worse for everybody else, especially if they have other siblings, just made everything worse. It impacts how children learn and their social environment. So when a child has experienced trauma, it impacts how they perform in school. It impacts their relationships with their friends. It impacts every aspect of their life. And children may adapt by dissociating and may forget details of the event. And of course, that piggybacks on the recantation. And if you dissociate, if you're abused like over and over, you can dissociate and you can totally block out periods of time. And sometimes it takes a while for children to regain that. I've seen it where children will remember something that happened years ago, and they'll be like, you know what, I just remember this happened. Like they'll just get like flashes of the incident. So it's not always that a child is not telling the truth. It's just that they may not have remembered, specific parts of what happened. So when it comes to helping children cope, it's a little bit different for children. So for adults, it doesn't have to be animated. It doesn't have to be colorful all the time. But it's important for us to be able to meet children where they are. So I got this information from Therapist Aid. It wouldn't let me put the different pictures on there, but the content came from Therapist Aid. But I've seen this be very successful with children when it comes to coping with anxiety, worrying, even anger. Stopping and listening, just giving kids these cards of these just ideas. Tell the kids to spend a few minutes just listening to the sounds around them and paying attention to what sounds they hear. Are they loud? Are they soft? And tell them to pay special attention to interesting sounds they've never heard before, like maybe a bee or is it called a cicada? A cicada in the trees outside. So those different little things make a big difference, and it helps kids not focus on the negative or the trauma that's happened to them, but it helps them stop and listen and pay attention to their environment and their surroundings. Having kids think about their favorite place or a place that makes them feel calm. This has worked. It's been very successful with a lot of my clients. Just having kids tell me about their favorite place. And I tell them to use their five senses, right? Think about what you hear when you're there, what you taste, what you smell, what you see, how you feel. And a lot of times it helps calm a child down when they're anxious, but encourage the child to practice that concept and to do it when they're not in a place of anxiety, so that in the event they need to go there, they're already familiar with how to get there. Taking deep breaths. Teaching kids how to do this is so much fun because, you know, they're very animated. They want to show you how they're doing the breathing, but practicing it with them and showing them how to inhale through their nose, hold the breath and count for 4 seconds and exhale through their mouth, and to focus on their breath. It's also helpful with decreasing anxiety. A lot of kids like to draw their worry. Drawing a picture about it helps them connect to it a little bit more. And that's us entering into the child's world. So we're meeting them where they're at, right? So can you draw a picture of what happened, or draw a picture of what you look like when you're angry? You know, different things like that are very helpful for children. And it's something that they can relate to because that's what they do in their world. Talking to children about, you know, being open to just talking about it. It's another way to help them cope. And that gives you an opportunity also to identify the people that they trust. So if there was anybody you could talk to about your feelings, who would it be? And helping them identify how to verbalize their feelings. You know, I feel blank when blank, or I feel worried when this happens. And this gives children a little more comfort to let them know that it's safe and it's okay to talk about it, because in a lot of different cultures, you know, children learning to cope, they adapt maladaptive behaviors because they're not taught to cope effectively. So just giving them the option to talk about it is helpful. Even like with the school counselors, that's a helpful thing for them to do. Kids like to move. They usually have a lot of energy. So encouraging them to get moving, to get outside and be active, play a sport, ride their bike, dance, do whatever it is that they like to do where they're moving their body. That distracts them from sitting there and having thoughts about something negative that has happened or thinking about anxiety. Practicing a hobby. A lot of kids like to play instruments. Kids teach themselves how to play the guitar, believe it or not. So it's cool to have kids, you know, tell me what you like to do. Tell me what kind of hobbies you like, because children can tap into, you know, their different creative sides. Some kids like to just play games or play the video game. That's a hobby too. Journaling. A lot of kids like to journal. And it's odd because I know when I was growing up, I didn't journal a lot. And that's not something that I heard. But I know at Bay Area Turning Point, we provide our clients with journals. And I've seen kids really, really learn to cope effectively just by writing things out. And you can encourage them to write what they're worried about. You know, write about what you do when you're worried. Write how you felt about that situation, and just say exactly how you felt. No one's gonna read it. It's just for you. I even have a child who created a calm corner, and that's how that child coped. She created a calm corner. She has the Calm app on her phone, and she plays the music, and she has all these cool stuffed animals, pictures that she likes in her corner, and that's a healthy coping mechanism for her. So you can even have children create calm corners. Another option. So helping children cope and families cope is different, because when you're coping as a family, it's everyone coming together as a whole. So the family could come together and read a book together, you know, family story time. The family could play board games, connect with neighbors, you know, networking with people who live around them in the neighborhood. Making a photo book is always fun. I know since the holidays are coming up, there are different things you can do, like you can get together, have everybody pick out a few pictures, buy a photo book, print them out, and everybody could talk about those memories and put the photo book together. And that is definitely a way to cope and reduce stress. Arts and crafts, doing those things as a family helps kids, you know, learn more about their parents, and helps parents learn more about the kids. And you can be creative together. Playing with puzzles. I know families love to do puzzles. I did puzzles growing up. So doing puzzles is fun as well. And listening to music. A lot of children like to listen to music. I didn't put that on the other slide because it was already on here. But listening to music is calming in almost every culture. So that's another healthy way for a family to cope with stress. And you can also restrict time watching the news, of course, with everything going on with coronavirus. Kids talk a lot about that. And they actually call it the Rona. They say Mr. Rona or Mrs. Rona. So definitely restricting the time that you have the news on to not induce anxiety in children is helpful. Practicing yoga as a family, doing breathing exercises, talking about having a support system, and identifying who in the family you would go to in the event you needed some help or wanted to talk. Family engagement activities like different games, like there's a Jenga called Totika, and you can ask different questions, and families can definitely engage with that and learn a lot about each other and determine where each other's mindsets are. Exercising together as a family, and that could just be walking. Doesn't have to be anything drastic. Walking, riding bikes, going to the park, doing different things like that.
Even doing a dance party.
Yes, a dance party. Thank you, Ellie. Yes, dance parties. And staying connected. You can use technology to stay connected with friends and families. I have a friend who does a Zoom conference. They do like a Zoom call every week where they pray. And I have another friend who is in a different state, and she connects everyone who's all over the place in different states. And we do Zoom calls just to stay connected and update each other on what's going on, and so you can actually see each other. And that helps decrease stress, you know, and it's an effective, healthy coping mechanism with coronavirus going on as well. And always remember to be kind to yourself and take breaks. Be kind to yourself. Now, this is a short breathing exercise because deep breathing is very, very helpful. I don't know if anyone else has practiced it, but I do deep breathing in the moment sometimes if I need to calm myself down or regroup. So this is just a quick exercise, and it actually came from Therapist Aid as well.
Just 1 second, let me pull it up.
Okay.
There we go.
Deep breathing is a simple exercise that involves consciously slowing and deepening your breathing. Research has demonstrated many health benefits of deep breathing. In this guide, we will focus on its use for stress management and relaxation. After some brief instructions, we'll help guide you in practicing the skill. When a person experiences anxiety, the body responds with symptoms that can include a racing heart, shallow breaths, sweating, a sense of fear or uneasiness, difficulty concentrating, and a blank mind. These symptoms can range from being slightly uncomfortable to being totally debilitating. Deep breathing is used to initiate the body's relaxation response. Relaxation is characterized by slower breathing, lower blood pressure, and a feeling of calm. Deep breathing can be used in the moment when you're experiencing a stressful situation, but it's also beneficial to practice when you already feel calm. To begin the exercise, sit in a comfortable position. You will slowly take in a deep breath, hold it, and then slowly release it. Each one of these steps will be timed to last 5 seconds. We'll display a counter on the screen, but it's important that you time yourself when you're practicing on your own. It's easy to go too quickly if you aren't paying attention. One quick tip before we get started. Breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth, as if you're blowing through a straw. This will help to slow yourself down. Consult your physician before practicing, especially if you have a history of epilepsy or heart disease. Let's begin. Follow the on-screen timer to pace yourself. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. 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 You've completed the deep breathing exercise. Be sure to practice daily for the full benefit of this skill.
I don't know about y'all, but that helped me calm down.
All right, so Allie's going to take us into some parenting tips now.
Awesome. All right. So with parenting tips in general, you want to always make sure you do things like set routines for the kids, right? Get them on a schedule, especially now with COVID and remote learning. You want to make sure you still help them stick to, waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, and going through that normal hygiene process as well. Don't just stay in your pajamas all day long. Get up, get dressed, get moving, right? And even breaks, right? If they would have had recess at school, maybe take them outside for a minute to go and do recess out there. Discuss with children, but gently when it comes to COVID, just because, you don't want to scare them further into things, but just make them aware of what's necessary, right? Washing your hands, wearing your mask, social distancing. Teaching some life skills can be also fun and a hobby thing, right? Exploring cooking or learning things like sewing, how to sew on patches even, or bedazzles, right? I know that's something that my niece loves to do. She bedazzles everything now. Eating healthy and balanced meals, right? Making sure they're getting vegetables and fruit in there as well as their protein and proper nutrition. And keeping track of your own anxiety throughout this process. It can be hard, especially if you've got multiple children at home, right? A lot of times when it comes to child abuse, especially, parents can be overly focused on the one child that was abused. And a lot of times the other kids don't intentionally get neglected, but they kind of go onto the back burner because we get so caught up and worried of, parents have this mentality that, I didn't pay enough attention to this child for this to happen, right? And that's not the case. Making sure that you yourself are engaging in self-care as well as helping your children engage in that self-care part. Don't dismiss their fears when it comes to things. One of y'all, Katisha, had commented, have those family meetings where you talk about emotions, right? In a non-judgmental space where you just even end it with, like, hey, I hear you. That is stressful, right? Even just a simple response like that can go a long way. Some other parenting tips along with kids, right? Keeping up with that exercise, learning with your child, right? Having that effective and open communication dialogue with them, kind of just still listening to them, validating their feelings when they come up with it. When they sit there and say, I'm worried, don't say, oh, you don't have to be worried. Validate that feeling of worry, like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of worried too, but we're going to get through this. getting familiar with outside resources for help for even for yourself, right? Maybe there's support groups you can get involved with. Teaching gratitude can be a big one, right? There's things like keeping a gratitude journal, even doing like gratitude. So what I have my brother do sometimes is with a little whiteboard marker on his mirror in the bathroom, write positive affirmations. You can do that as a good coping technique for not just your child, but for you as well. Identifying your support system as well, right? Sometimes we can't always turn to our family members because they can just be too close to the topic. So making sure that you have either support group or trusted friends that you can go to. That's going to be really important because it's going to be a tough road. Okay, so for this meditation exercise, we're going to do briefly. Okay, what I want y'all all to do is, you can do this with your eyes open or closed. Closed is better. Okay, but I want y'all to just really get comfortable in your chairs and just kind of relax and sit. And we're kind of going to go over the 5 senses that Naila was talking about. Okay, so for you parents, this can be a great tool to use when you just need a minute to yourself. It's also good to use and teach kids as well when they're going through that anxiety piece. So what I want you to do is just take a nice couple of deep breaths for me, right? Just like we practice. I know y'all are excellent deep breathers now, right? And then what I want you to do is imagine a place that you know, no one else knows about, but a place that makes you comfortable, where you feel safe and secure, right? It could be a beach, it could be something you make up completely, but a place that only you know about that really makes you comfortable and safe, okay? Now, once you have that place in mind, I want you to really put yourself in that picture, okay? Picture all of the things around you. What do you see? Do you see maybe waves crashing onto the sand? Maybe you see birds flying, maybe some clouds, the sun. Maybe you're in your room and you see your fan and your window open. Just take in and make sure you notice 5 things that you see. And once you have those 5 things, I want you to take notice of 4 things that you can touch around you in that space. Maybe you feel your toes between the sand. Maybe you can feel your body laying on that beach towel, or you feel that comfy, cozy blanket that you have. Maybe you even feel the light breeze from the fan if you're in your room. Whatever you feel sensation-wise on your body, from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. 4 things that you can feel. Now I want you to really pay attention to maybe finding 3 things you can hear. Maybe it's a seagull in the distance, birds chirping around you if you're at the park, the sound of a dog or a child laughing. Whatever those 3 things are to you, 3 things that bring you comfort and joy. Now I want you to think about 2 things that you can smell. Doesn't have to be something that's always there, right? Maybe it's the smell of your favorite fresh cookies, right? Maybe it's the salt coming off from the sea. But I want you to take focus on those 2 things that bring that comfort and smell for you. Now I want you to think about 1 thing that you can taste while you're in that safe place, okay? Maybe it's your leftover lunch from, your favorite meal that you had in that picture. Maybe it's you go and grab for that batch of cookies. Whatever it is that you might taste. And when you have that safe place, I want y'all to slowly open your eyes and come back. Now, y'all don't have to share what your safe place is with me. That's for you to know. And same thing with kids, right? Your safe place is for you to bring you comfort, relaxation, that moment of anxiety, and when you're constantly going, right? But that's a simple tool exercise that you can practice with your kids. Sometimes we need to do it together.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about is identifying support systems. So this is really a key component in helping families where there's abuse in the home, because typically if a child's being abused, most likely one of the other parents is being abused as well. So having a support system really is key for families. You also, having a support system also helps with your safety planning, especially if you're preparing to leave. And I'm about to show y'all something. Identifying a support system can be an activity that you do as a family, that you do with your child. That obviously it would be suggested that it's the non-abusive parent doing it with the child. But I mean, you could even do it with the abusive parent, just turn it into an activity, a family activity. You know, who, if we're in trouble, who can we turn to? So this is a screenshot of something that we kind of use, and this can be, it doesn't have to be this exact template. With this template, you would, the child or the person would put themselves in the middle, and then all these other boxes are people that they feel like they can rely on if they're in a bad situation. Like they feel like they can lean on this person. They feel like they can trust this person. And then down below, you have a list of people. So you have parents, friends, siblings, other family members, people from your church, people from school. What else we got there? Youth center, crisis hotline, health clinic, anybody that you feel like you can lean on for support. Sometimes what we do with the children is we'll have them draw the people. So they'll draw themselves in the middle, and they can draw all the other people on the outside, turn it into a little bit of an art activity. But this helps identify a support system, especially if there's isolation in the home. It's really important to really dig deep and find, who can I trust? Who can I turn to? So once you identify your support system, it's important to know some safety tips, especially if you are preparing to leave an abusive situation. But these are some general safety tips. Whenever we do safety planning with clients, it's not a one size fits all. So as I go through these safety tips, don't think that, you know, you have to follow every single one of these, because you tailor these tips to your situation. So reaching out to that support system that you've identified. That's why you want to identify who your support system is, so you have somebody to reach out to. Maybe they have good insight on what to do. Observe behavioral patterns to determine when the abuser could have a violent outburst. Teach children how to stay out of arguments. If the parents are arguing, children tend to run to the rescue, or they get stressed out and they don't want to see mommy and daddy fighting, so they try to make them stop, and in the process they end up getting hurt. Don't threaten violence against the abuser. This happens a lot. It's like, well, I'm not going to let them talk to me like that. So you threaten right back, and then that just makes it worse. Identify resources for assistance in leaving. So domestic violence crisis centers, domestic violence sexual assault hotlines, police station, health clinics. One important thing you really want to do is make sure, and this is just regardless, you always want to make sure you have your important documents and important and valuable items in a safe and easily accessible place. Usually what I would tell clients is, you know, pack a bag with clothing and keep it in a safe central location, but keep your documents in there too. So documents meaning like insurance papers, birth certificates, social security cards, license, bank statements, things like that. Don't ever hesitate to call the police if there's violence or threat of violence. Even if they can't do anything right then and there, if they can't make an arrest, they still got to make a report that they came out. They're going to make an incident report. The more of a paper trail you have, the more likely it is you will be able to obtain a protective order. Practice healthy relationship behaviors. And this is something we're going to go into a little bit after this section whenever we talk about prevention strategies. Avoid confrontational communication. This goes back to don't threaten with violence. Don't confront somebody that's already in a fit of rage, because all that's going to do is make it worse. Have a list of helpful phone numbers written down. I'm going to emphasize written down, because we're so reliant on our phones these days. Like I'm just going to be completely transparent. The only phone numbers I know by heart are mine, work, and my mom's. I don't know anybody else's number by heart. I mean, 911, of course, but it's really important to, if you identify that support system, take those people and memorize their numbers, or have their numbers written down in case something happens to your phone. Think of ways you've been able to de-escalate violent behaviors before. One thing that I've always been taught is what has worked in the past. Go back to the past. What has worked before, and try that. Have a code word or phrase with people in your support system. So, for example, let's say mom is your support system. If you call mom and you say this certain word or you say this certain phrase, mom knows you're in trouble. Mom knows, call the police and get them over there. Identify a safe place in the home, someplace where you can easily access and exit preferably, and someplace where there's no access to weapons. You can always call the area turning point or any other domestic violence or sexual assault crisis center in your area for assistance with protective orders. So there's the Bridge Over Troubled Waters in Pasadena, there's Houston Area Women's Center, Missouri County Women's Center, Galveston Resource and Crisis Center, Montgomery. There are so many women's shelters and crisis centers that can assist with protective orders and other legal remedies. Identify escape routes in the house. So, identify all the rooms and where you would be able to escape if you did get trapped in that room. If it is safe to do so, inform neighbors of violence in the home. That way neighbors can be on alert. If they hear or see anything that's out of place, they can call the police. As far as children go, limit and monitor where the children can sleep over. So, make sure that you're not just letting them go sleep over at little Johnny's house without knowing what kind of household little Johnny lives in. Monitor who's allowed in your home, and again, whose homes the children are allowed to go to. We already kind of talked about this earlier. Teach them body safety and use correct terms for body parts so they know. Discuss technology safety to children, including but not limited to talking to strangers online and not giving out personal or private information. This is another thing that leads to abuse and trafficking. You have sexual predators online that are trying to pose as children to get your child's information, or you have this person who's a trafficker trying to gain your child's trust. Say they're in one of those rebellious stages and they're sitting there complaining about home life, and this person gives them this promise of a better life. Well, they believe this person, they start trusting this person, they meet up with this person, and before you know it, they're being trafficked by this person. So really discuss that technology safety. Be aware of technology uses. This goes for children and parents. If there is abuse going on, keep your location off so they can't stalk you. Clear your browsing history. If you make a phone call to a crisis center or to the police, call another number directly after. That way, if your abuser gets a hold of your phone and they hit redial, they're not going to get that place that you called for help. They're just going to get whatever random number you called after that. So those are all risk reduction techniques, which you're going to use whenever there's already a violent situation going on. What we're going to discuss right now is prevention, primary prevention, which is trying to get to the root cause of violent behavior. So it's trying to stop this behavior before it becomes an issue. So part of what prevention is, we're identifying morals and values. We're learning cultural competency. We're challenging traditional gender roles that have been assigned in gender socialization. We're using direct and peaceful communication. So Naila talked earlier about using I statements. I feel this kind of way when you do this. That's direct communication, but it's also peaceful communication. It's not confrontational. It's just, you're letting this person know they did something that made you feel some kind of way, and you need them to do this. So what we're going to look at with prevention is challenging risk factors. Some of the risk factors for sexual and domestic violence are toxic masculinity, entitlement, objectification of women. This is looking at women as objects instead of humans. Hostility towards women. So feeling threatened by women, feeling threatened by women's empowerment, being threatened by women's movements, sexually aggressive peers, rape culture, weak laws. Rape culture is normalizing and accepting sexual violence in a sense. You see this in ads all the time. I don't have any on this presentation, but there's one where it says, spike your best friend's eggnog. That's basically saying commit date rape, drug your friend's drink, drug your best friend's drink. And it's a vodka ad. Some of the other ads, you know, it looks like there's a gang rape or an orgy going on, and they're advertising jeans or cologne. This is rape culture. Let's see, where was I? Oh, weak laws and policies regarding sexual and domestic violence. I don't know if anybody else knows this. It's news to me, but there are no federal sexual assault laws right now. Every state has their own sexual assault laws, but there's no federal laws regarding sexual assault. So right now, we still have very weak laws and policies regarding protecting victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. On the other hand, we want to promote protective factors such as consent. This is a big thing that we're really pushing right now is consent, affirmative consent. Not, okay, you said no, so let me try to convince you to say yes. Or let me threaten you to the point where you do say yes. That is not consent. Consent is giving that yes willingly. Empathy. So understanding where somebody's coming from, connectedness, that's what we talked about or that's what she talked about in the video, just connecting, showing somebody that you care about them. Healthy parenting, having positive influences, peaceful conflict resolution. You know, there's always gonna be conflict, but there are peaceful ways to resolve it that don't include violence. And then the big one, establishing boundaries. And, you know, we've talked about boundaries throughout this entire presentation. So some strategies to prevent violence. We need to strengthen economic supports for families because poverty is a risk factor as well for sexual and domestic violence. We need to change social norms to promote positive parenting. We need to provide quality care and education early in life. We don't have to teach any kind of sexual education to elementary school students, but children are never too young to learn simple things like respect. You can start teaching those healthy behaviors, establishing boundaries, respect, things like that. You can teach them that at a very young age. Providing opportunities to empower and support girls and women. Like I said, we want to teach healthy behaviors at a young age. We want to enhance parenting skills to promote healthy child development. And we want to intervene to lessen harms and prevent future risks. So primary prevention is trying to stop the violence before it starts. But obviously, that is not going to be an overnight process. That is not going to happen in our lifetime. We're not going to eliminate sexual violence in our lifetime, unfortunately. So we do have to have these interventions and these safety tips and these other services to lessen those harms of people that have experienced this. So violence is a community issue. It's not an individual issue. It is a community issue. So how can we help? We can promote safe and healthy communities. Understand that violence impacts all of us. It doesn't just happen to certain kind of people or in certain kind of areas. It happens to everybody and it happens everywhere. Violence prevention is a collective action. We all have to work together to prevent it. Communities need to take ownership. Communities need to understand that this is occurring in that community. And we need to work together to prevent violence. So how can community organizations and businesses help? Well, we can train staff on recognizing signs of domestic violence and or sexual assault and child abuse, and what to do if there's an outcry in their establishment. And this is any business or organization. Train staff on reporting protocols if they notice something. Train staff on bystander intervention and other prevention measures. You know, especially in like restaurants and bar scenes, you would want staff to be trained on successful bystander intervention. And then having resources readily available, have postings of the domestic violence and sexual assault agencies in your establishment so people can see them, have the brochures out so people can grab them. So that all being said, some of the services that Bay Area Turning Point offers, as well as the other domestic violence and sexual assault crisis centers, we do have a 24-hour crisis hotline. We do provide counseling, and that also includes support groups. We do have housing options available for people that are fleeing domestic violence or sexual assault. We do provide legal advocacy where the advocates will help them file charges. They'll help them obtain a protective order. They'll give them referrals to other legal resources that they need. We do have shelter services. So within our shelter, we provide them case management. It can be on a weekly basis or as needed. You know, the case managers work with the clients to help them recover from their situation that they've been in. We also have on-site childcare and food services available. And then the educational and prevention opportunities. So if there are organizations that are wanting to learn more about topics regarding domestic violence or sexual assault, that can include prevention, that can include trafficking, that can include child abuse, anything that relates to domestic violence and sexual assault, we can customize trainings for those businesses and come out and help out, you know, help train the staff, you know, just give a brief presentation if that's what you need. But we do customize these presentations and trainings. So we are running up on 7:30. Hang on just a second. So here's our contact information of all three of us. If anybody is needing to contact any of us, all of our emails are right there, as well as our phone numbers and extensions. And does anybody have any questions? We're gonna go, hang on, before we open the floor up, let me stop the recording and we will